Welcome everyone to today's hearing and on compliance with committee oversight. Ask everyone to stand for the pledge. Right behind me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. It's the first time a subcommittee's probably ever been gavelled in by cell phone. Here's the gavel.
Next time it'll be AI.
That's right. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Welcome everyone to the third hearing of the Subcommittee on Responsiveness and Accountability to Oversight. Today, the subcommittee will work to get answers directly from representatives from the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security. We also invited the Departments of State and Health and Human Services to testify today, and we are disappointed that these two agencies are not here to answer our questions, especially since the State Department has failed to produce documents pursuant to the committee's subpoena. We look forward to their testimony in July. We also look forward today to engaging with the witnesses that have appeared to discuss the productions we have received to date and the status of our other outstanding requests. Since the beginning of the Biden administration, committee Republicans have made over 100 different requests for information and documents concerning the operations and actions of the Justice Department. The committee has also made many requests for information and documents concerning the operations and actions of the FBI and DHS. The committee has reiterated these requests for information and documents to all three agencies multiple times. On February 2nd, 2023, Chairman Jordan issued subpoenas to Attorney General Garland and FBI Director Wray regarding the use of federal law enforcement and counterterrorism tools to investigate concerned parents at school board meetings. To date, the responses to these subpoenas have been deficient and overdue. While the FBI has produced some documents to the committee and made other documents available for review, questions remain, and the committee awaits the Bureau's next production. On April 10th, 2023, Chairman Jordan issued another subpoena to Director Wray concerning the FBI's anti-Catholic memo, which equated Catholics to violent extremists. The FBI's production to this subpoena has been deficient to date, and the FBI still needs to produce certain documents to the committee pursuant to that subpoena, such as information regarding the genesis of the memorandum. On April 28th, 2023, Chairman Jordan issued a subpoena to Director Easterly to investigate the nature and extent of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, or CISA's, interactions with companies and groups over content moderation. CISA's response to date, a mere 200 pages that is extremely limited in scope, has been wholly incomplete and inadequate. The Department of Homeland Security is also here today because of multiple outstanding requests regarding immigration policies and actions. At the DHS oversight hearing on April 28, 2022, then-Ranking Member Jordan asked Secretary Mayorkas whether 42 individuals on the terrorist screening database who were encountered at our southwest border were released into the United States. Secretary Mayorkas promised a response over a year ago that never came, despite Chairman Jordan sending several follow-up letters, including 2 this year. On November 22nd, 2022, the committee requested detailed information from DHS regarding the illegal categorical parole program created for Venezuelan nationals. Committee staff also requested the same information and documentation for the Cuban, Haitian, and Nicaraguan parole programs. To date, the committee has not received a substantive response to its requests regarding DHS's illegal categorical parole programs. The department is also violating several laws mandating that certain reports be sent to Congress. The Border Security Metrics Report for fiscal year 2022 is over 8 months late. By failing to follow the law on this report, Congress does not know the number of gotaways, turnbacks, and the unlawful border crossing effectiveness rate during the worst border crisis in our nation's history. The estimate of required detention space report is required by law to be submitted to Congress every 6 months. According to DHS, this detention report was discontinued despite still being required by current law. While these agencies have begun to produce some documents to our other requests, the committee continues to have concerns about the responsiveness of the agencies. For example, in response to a recent request from the committee, the Department of Justice indicated that it will not be complying with our request. Rather, the department will instead, quote, speak through its court filings, end quote. These hearings play a critical role in assisting the committee in its oversight obligations which in turn allows the committee to examine potential legislative changes within our jurisdiction, and I might add, appropriations decisions. The courts have recognized that Congress's power to conduct oversight is an indispensable component of our authority to legislate. Without the information that the committee needs from the administration, we cannot do our jobs. We look forward today to engaging with the witnesses who have appeared to discuss the productions we've received to date and to discuss the status of our other outstanding requests. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Swalwell, for an opening statement.
I thank the chairman and just want to level set what this is really about. It's about the client that the law firm of Insurrection LLP, chaired by Jim Jordan, represents. That's Donald Trump. It's a client's got just one, it's a firm with just one client. And so we're here today because Donald Trump has been indicted, 37 counts for stealing and sharing classified information. And so this is an effort to defend him in the court of public opinion, to taint the jury and the case against him. And it's pretty rich to me that Jim Jordan is 400 plus days into being in violation of his own subpoena, and we're hearing about lawlessness and violations of the law. I couldn't think of a greater prerogative Congress has than its oversight capabilities and making sure its subpoenas mean something. So to our witnesses today, thank you for doing what Chairman Jim Jordan was not willing to do, which was to show up in response to a request from Congress. So he continues to be in violation of the law. You show up and honor the law. But I have to say, and I think Chairman Jordan will appreciate this, this is getting a little embarrassing. And it feels a little bit like the 2017 Cleveland Browns. How many games they won in 2017? 0. They were 0-16. So they'd suit up every game, they'd say the pledge, they'd take the field, and everyone was really rooting for them because they were told as fans that they're gonna win. They kept losing, and they kept losing, and they kept losing. And so I'm embarrassed for Chairman Jordan because we were promised that the crime of the century was coming from John Durham, and then we learned that John Durham took 2 cases to trial and he lost both of them. Then we were promised that Hunter Biden was gonna go down for fraud, money laundering, all this salacious stuff. Then we learned that the Trump-appointed attorney, where half the investigation was conducted under the Trump administration, indicted Hunter Biden for failure to pay taxes that he ultimately ended up paying. The Weaponization Committee, I don't know if you remember them. We haven't had a hearing in over a month from them. Again, has failed to prove anything other than that it's just a obstruction of justice effort on behalf of Donald Trump. So Chairman Jordan's committee is starting to look like the Cleveland Browns. And it's just goose egg after goose egg. And so we'll sit here and we'll go through it. And I know one of the issues is around the Mar-a-Lago search. And so what I want to know from Chairman Jordan is he used to love Bill Barr. Chairman Jordan was thirsty for Bill Barr. And we saw it and we heard it throughout so many congressional hearings. Thank God for Bill Barr, he said on September 12, 2019. June 24, 2020, Bill Barr is doing the Lord's work. April 10, 2019, Jim Jordan again. Bill Barr is pursuing the truth, exactly what Americans want from their Attorney General. Now, if you're tracking, Bill Barr no longer is defending or doing the bidding of Donald Trump. In fact, as it relates to Mar-a-Lago, Bill Barr has said, the effort to present Trump as a victim in the Mar-a-Lago document affair is cynical political propaganda. Barr said earlier this month, Trump's toast. And then Barr also said the government acted responsibly, and it was Donald Trump who acted irresponsibly. So my question for Jim Jordan is, if this investigation of Donald Trump is good enough for Bill Barr, who you love, why is it not good enough for you? Why are we going through this and dragging the department in if somebody that you love, who's doing the Lord's work, says that the investigation is valid? And by the way, we are defending all of this, and if we could show the next slide, the person, the client that's being defended, the actions are actually quite indefensible. But this is what he wants, because this is what he posted this morning. Donald Trump said, Congress, all caps, please investigate the political witch hunts against me currently being brought by the corrupt DOJ and FBI who are totally out of control. This continuing saga is retribution against me for winning and, even more importantly to them, election interference regarding the 2024 presidential election. It'll be their updated form, spelling not necessarily correct, of rigging our most important election. Look at the polls. They can't beat me, parens, MAGA. At the ballot box, the only way they can win is to cheat. Stop them now. Stop them now. That's what this is. This is an effort to just follow the tweets that their client is sending them. And by the way, we know what they think of law enforcement because their colleague, the next one, continues to post this, and this is one of the colleagues who's running the show here. There's not a respect for laws or law enforcement. They want to defund the FBI. They raise money off of defunding the FBI. So again, we'll sit here for another Browns loss, but it's just too bad that the country's going to have to go through this when we're seeing healthcare not being addressed, our kids in classrooms not being protected, not taking on a climate chaos crisis across the globe. So many things people want us to focus on, and we're just going to do the bidding for Insurrection LLP for the client, Donald Trump. I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witness. First, the Honorable Zephany Buteau. Ms. Buteau is the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Legislative Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. She's the primary liaison to Congress and responds to inquiries from Congress, notifies Congress about department's initiatives, policies, and programs, and advises the department's senior leadership about the activities of Congress. The Honorable Carlos Uriarte. Mr. Uriarte is the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legislative Affairs of the Department of Justice. He is the leader of the component responsible for managing the department's relationship with Congress. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Please rise and raise your right hand. You swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You can be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Ms. Buteau, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Swalwell, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I am honored to appear before you today. My name is Zephany Buteau, and I serve as Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. With nearly a decade of experience on Capitol Hill, I have a deep appreciation for the important work of Congress and a true respect for its oversight responsibilities. Congressional oversight is vital to our functioning democracy. The congressional affairs teams across DHS primarily consist of dedicated career public servants. The teams work tirelessly to respond to oversight requests, constituent casework, and other time-sensitive matters. The Department of Homeland Security is subject to oversight from over 70 congressional committees and subcommittees. Since January 20th, 2021, the department has responded to over 1,400 congressional letters. During the 117th Congress, DHS participated in 123 congressional hearings and over 4,500 non-hearing engagements, such as CODELs, staff DELs, demonstrations, site visits, and roundtables. In the first few months of the 118th Congress, the department received over 200 congressional letters, including a significant number of expansive requests for information and documents. Additionally, DHS provided 45 witnesses to 30 hearings and participated in over 1,200 briefings and other non-hearing engagements. We are making great efforts to meet the increased oversight demands from Congress, all while balancing, as the Constitution envisions, the legitimate oversight interests of Congress with the department's law enforcement and national security responsibilities, and the confidentiality interests of the executive branch. DHS depends on subject matter experts throughout the department for the information needed to provide accurate and complete responses to congressional inquiries. Not surprisingly, these efforts are often the same leaders and operators performing the department's many critical functions. As a result, the information needed may not always be available within the timetable requested. In some cases, operational dynamics or the need for interagency coordination may delay or limit responses. To that end, we conduct regular meetings with DHS offices and components in order to work collaboratively to respond to congressional requests. The committee indicated that today's hearing would examine responses to its oversight requests. Since the beginning of the 118th Congress, the committee has sent 8 document request letters to the department and its components, some of which incorporate or reference requests that were made last Congress. The department is complying with the committee's requests in good faith, consistent with the accommodations process. To date, the department has produced over 2,200 pages of documents responsive to the letters received during this Congress, as well as over 500 pages responsive to requests made during the previous Congress. We are continuing to review potentially responsive records and will produce additional records as appropriate as they become available. We are committed to cooperating with the committee's legitimate efforts to seek information consistent with our obligations under the Constitution. We look forward to continued engagement with the committee and thank you for your partnership and service to the American people. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Buteau. Mr. Uriarte, you may begin.
Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Swalwell, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today for a second time this Congress. When I last appeared before you in March, I committed to working with the committee in the tradition of accommodation and good faith. Since then, the department has worked every day to meet that commitment by keeping open the lines of communication and by continuing to respond to your oversight requests. I'd like to start today by talking about the important role of the Office of Legislative Affairs and why I agreed to serve as Assistant Attorney General. As a former congressional staffer, I believe transparency and accountability improve the operations of the Department of Justice. I also respect the important and distinct institutional roles that both Congress, to conduct oversight of the executive branch, and the Department of Justice play to protect, and the Department of Justice in its part, to protect the integrity of its prosecutorial law enforcement efforts. I believe my role is to build bridges across these differences, to reach compromise on oversight matters, and to collaborate with you and your colleagues on legislation that helps the American people. This includes working to fulfill the department's robust legislative agenda, consistent with the Attorney General's mission, to uphold the rule of law, to keep our country safe, and to protect civil rights. I'd like to raise 3 of these items with you today. Reauthorizing Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, the department's investments in state and local law enforcement through our various grant programs, and the department's FY 2023 budget. This year, Congress is tasked with reauthorizing FISA Section 702. As a vital national security tool, Section 702 has been used to stop ransomware attacks like Colonial Pipeline and helps us combat international fentanyl trafficking. While the value of Section 702 has been well documented, we also recognize the need to work with Congress on common sense reforms that will assure the American people that this tool will be used appropriately. I am confident that by working together, we can reauthorize 702 and retain this essential national security tool. Second, on a local scale, the department proudly champions grants in each and every one of your districts. In 2022, the department awarded more than $4.9 billion in grants to communities across the country. In 2023, we plan to award more than $6 billion. These grants directly support state and local law enforcement and make your communities safer by combating violent crime and gun violence. Third, The critical work of the department would not be possible without funding provided by Congress. In 2023, the department saw an increase in programmatic funding for the first time in years. This allowed us to make significant strides in fulfilling the department's mission. As the Attorney General stated before the Appropriations Subcommittee, we have serious concerns that any cuts to our budget will result in fewer federal prosecutors addressing violent crime in our communities, fewer DEA agents fighting the fentanyl crisis, and fewer grants to support state and local law enforcement. Overall, budget cuts would have a significant negative impact on public safety. These are just some of the legislative issues that I and my small but mighty team of dedicated attorneys and support staff are responsible for managing. In addition to these priorities, we also spend a significant amount of time working with you and your staff on oversight requests. In the last 6 months, in response to multiple committees on both sides of the Capitol, the department and our components have testified at over 30 hearings, provided more than 70 briefings, and sent over 200 letters in response to hundreds of requests. For the House Judiciary Committee alone, the department and its components have produced more than 82,000 pages of documents, made 8 current employees available for 9 transcribed interviews, and provided or agreed to provide testimony by senior department officials at multiple oversight hearings. As I testified to you in March, in order to work most efficiently and effectively, the accommodation process must be a joint effort between me and you, our staff, collaboratively. We can best meet your needs and prioritize your requests if there are open and clear lines of communication between us, and I am hopeful today can be part of that dialogue. In closing, I want to state, on behalf of myself and the department, that we value your partnership in working towards legislation that enriches the lives of your constituents. As a former congressional staffer, I believe congressional oversight is an important part of our system of government. I remain optimistic that by working together, we will be able to satisfy the committee's oversight needs while safeguarding the integrity of the department's vital law enforcement efforts and prosecutorial responsibilities. Thank you, and I look forward to a productive discussion today.
Thank you. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. The chair is going to recognize himself for 5 minutes. Ms. Butow, understanding CISA's role in censorship on social media is a crucial part of the committee's investigation into the apparent collusion between the federal government and technology and social media companies. Prior to today, the committee had only received 200 pages of documents responsive to the April 28, 2023 subpoena. That subpoena was due on May 22nd of 2023. Mere hours before this hearing today, CISA produced additional documents pursuant to the subpoena, and we have not been able to review those documents before this hearing. During a June 2nd phone call with committee staff, CISA committed to asking DHS's Chief Counsel's Office about the production timeline and size. When does CISA intend to make another production, and how many productions does CISA anticipate making?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. I can appreciate a little bit of the frustration with, the timeline of the document productions. It is correct that there was a production earlier today, and I am anticipating an additional production as soon as this afternoon. Anytime we make productions, we work collaboratively across the components with our Office of General Counsel and OLA, and we will continue to work with you and your staff in a meaningful way forward.
Two productions in one day would be outstanding. The same day as the hearing makes it a little challenging, but can you commit to producing additional documents, say by July 6th? Is that, if you're looking at today, that would be reasonable?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
That's great. Now, why are the only documents that CISA has provided thus far are to the committee's 200 pages of switchboarding emails?
So as I mentioned, anytime we're doing any sort of document production, the Office of Legislative Affairs works with the components and the General Counsel to determine what is both responsive and appropriate, and we continue to look for additional information. So I think it would be beyond the scope of just the Office of Legislative Affairs to speak to the sequencing but can commit to working with you moving forward.
Now, you'd agree that the committee's subpoena compels the production of additional categories of documents, correct?
Within the scope of the request, we will continue to work with your staff, Mr. Chair.
For example, the subpoena compels the production of certain documents and communications between or among CISA and the executive branch of the U.S. government, correct?
As the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs, I leave it to the Office of General Counsel to speak to what the subpoena compels or doesn't compel. As for our office, I can commit that we will continue to work with your staff in a meaningful way.
Can you tell me if those documents responsive to that request, certain documents and communications between CISA and the executive branch, are they included in the most recent production? Can you speak to that?
I'm unable to speak to that at this moment.
Okay. And the subpoena also compels the production of certain documents and communications internal to CISA, correct?
Respectfully, Mr. Chair, anything speaking to what a subpoena compels or doesn't compel is squarely within the lane of our Office of General Counsel. So that would be, a little bit outside of my lane to speak to.
Okay, so you can't speak to whether those documents, internal documents, are in the production today?
I cannot.
Okay. The documents produced to the committee contain redactions, numerous redactions, despite the subpoena explicitly instructing CISA to produce unredacted copies of the documents. The committee is requesting that CISA produce unredacted copies of the documents as the subpoena compels them to do. Can you commit to that?
With regards to redactions, again, this is a space where the Office of General Counsel works with the Office of Legislative Affairs and our components. We look forward to working with your staff in terms of the accommodations process, but I would not say that I can unilaterally speak to what documents will or will not be redacted.
Do you believe that it's appropriate for any agency, really, to fail to comply in a timely manner with the committee's subpoenas and requests?
The department responds to every request it receives. As you can surely appreciate, we have over 70 committees of jurisdiction, so not always in the timetable contemplated, but we do, as a department, have a responsibility to be responsive to Congress.
Thank you. Ranking members recognized for 5 minutes.
For the Assistant Secretary, is it true that the department has responded to over 1,400 congressional letters since January 2021? Does that sound about accurate?
Yes.
And recently, with the expiration of Title 42, what effect did that have across the workforce to try and control the migrant flow at the border?
With the lifting of Title 42, it was an all-hands-on-deck approach. If we take the Office of Legislative Affairs, for example, we conducted over 40 member-level engagements, staff briefings, engagement with stakeholders, and so I would say that it was all hands on deck.
And Mr. Uriarte, Assistant Attorney General, am I right that there've been 5 letters sent to the department from this committee, and each letter has been responded to? Is that right?
On the specific school board's topic,
In the month of June, sorry. In the month of June, how many letters were sent to you from this committee?
that sounds correct, sir.
Is that 5?
Yes, that sounds
And
correct.
have all 5 been responded to?
That sounds correct, yes.
Madam Assistant Secretary, I want to talk about the Disinformation Governance Board. Are you familiar with Nina Jankowicz?
Yes, I am.
Who is she?
She was an employee through the department, as I understand it, related to the Disinformation Governance Board.
Are you familiar with a post that the chairman of this committee, Jim Jordan, made with respect to Ms. Jankowicz?
I'm not.
Not familiar with a falsely manipulated video of her head on a poster board which was altered to make it appear as if she supported a tool to alter Twitter posts?
I am not familiar with that, member.
Well, we ultimately learned, in light of the chairman doing it, that Ms. Jankowicz and her family received tens of thousands of death threats because of actions by MAGA individuals, including the chairman who put that up there, and she had to engage private security. And this happened at a time, I believe, that Ms. Jankowicz was 9 months pregnant. And again, it was a misrepresentation to suggest she had done something she had not. Is there a cost when disinformation comes from Congress to the employees at DHS? Do they receive death threats? Are they put in danger?
Ranking Member Swallow, I would say that there is always a human cost when individuals are encouraged to behave poorly or believe mistruths.
With respect to your agency, is it true that your agency has voluntarily provided, Madam Assistant Secretary, 5 employees for transcribed interviews? Is that correct?
That's correct, Ranking Member Swallow.
In addition, will Secretary Mayorkas be freely appearing before the House Judiciary Committee anytime soon?
Yes, he will be appearing in July.
And what else is your agency doing in response to the chairman's requests, as well as other committees with oversight jurisdiction of the department?
I appreciate that question. We are providing transcribed interviews to several committees of jurisdiction. The Secretary has testified 5 times already this Congress. With respect to this committee and the request to appear here, the Office of Legislative Affairs provided a briefing in May to discuss and scope the request from the committee, and we remain open to engagement and providing additional information as needed.
Thank you. And Mr. Uriarte, just so I understand, I know this is a prosecutor, but for the public, will the department ever, in your mind, has it ever in the past, will ever in the future, pierce grand jury secrecy in any investigation because a Republican or a Democrat asks? And why won't you?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. As we've discussed previously, the department has a number of different confidentiality interests that are at play when there is an ongoing investigation. And those include information that would relate to the grand jury secrecy rules, which are, of course, statutory rules that require secrecy of information that is that is involved with the grand jury. And so that is an additional protection that we must take into account whenever we are talking about these types of congressional requests, including congressional requests that involve ongoing matters.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. At this time, I'll recognize myself for a period of 5 minutes of questions. On April 10th, 2023, the committee subpoenaed FBI Director Wray for information regarding the FBI's handling of domestic violence extremism investigations against Catholic Americans and its effect on protected First Amendment activity. On April 28, 2023, the FBI provided 248 pages of documents in response to the subpoena, but the FBI's production has still been partial and is deemed to be deficient at this point. We do appreciate the partial compliance, but I have a series of questions for you, Mr. Uriarte, about that production and what remains to be provided to Congress. In response to the committee's April 10th subpoena, the FBI produced documents on April 28th. The production was accompanied by a cover letter from Acting Assistant Director Christopher Durham that said, quote, "Upon the completion of our internal review, the FBI will provide additional information on its findings to the committee." Can you speak to what step of the process the Bureau is currently in on that internal review and when we can anticipate an additional production?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. As we spoke about last time, this is something that, I take personally, given how problematic that particular document was. I know the FBI takes it very seriously as well. That's why they have sought to do this internal review by the Inspections Division. I understand that review is nearing the end. I don't know how close it is, but I understand it is wrapping up soon. And the plan is, as I think has been indicated to the committee previously, but just to make sure it's clear the FBI plans to brief the committee on the findings of that report. And the intention of that report is to both walk through what happened here, how this happened, and how the FBI can make sure that another offensive product, like the FBI Richmond product that we're speaking of now, never happens again.
Well, certainly good to hear that we share that last objective. One of the things that we believe is very pertinent to getting to the bottom of those important questions is understanding which personnel within either local law enforcement or within the Bureau were involved in the review and approval of the memo itself. And that is one of the things that hasn't yet been disclosed to this committee. Is that part of your ongoing work for information that will ultimately be disclosed to us?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Yes, certainly we are taking into account all of the requests that the committee has made, where we are in our own internal processes. We're continuing to work through a variety of information requests from the committee, including the transcribed interviews. I mention those only because it's our understanding that the transcribed interviews have been a significant priority for the committee, and that, as you know, takes significant time and investment on our end, but we're continuing to work through the requests, particularly on the Richmond item, recognizing that it is a priority for this committee.
And last on that subject, of the production that was previously made to the committee, there were significant redactions therein of information that to the committee appeared to be important for us to be able to review. As part of this internal review process, also consideration of what, if any, portions of the prior production are appropriate for disclosure in an unredacted state to us in the future.
Well, thanks for the question. As I think we've talked about before, I view my job as being in a position to be able to, as efficiently and effectively as possible, get the committee the information it needs. And that is part of why we will sometimes include redactions on documents that are produced to the committee. It enables us to protect our confidentiality interests, but focus on getting the committee the information that it's in search of. And when there are questions like you've raised about specific redactions or specific information that may underlie redactions, that is, I think part of the normal accommodations process. And, I'd love to have that continued conversation with you and your team.
On May 3rd, 2023, the committee wrote to Director Davis of the U.S. Marshal Service requesting information about why radical left-wing groups have not been arrested for harassing and intimidating Supreme Court justices outside of their private homes, pursuant to 18 United States Code 1507. The submission deadline was May 17th, 2023. To date, the committee has not received a response to this outstanding request. We have since reached out to both DOJ and the U.S. Marshals regarding the request, including a call to the department and its component on June 7th. To date, we have not received a date certain by which we can expect a response. Can you provide insight for us on when we might expect a response to those requests?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate the question. I know, again, we spoke about this previously. As you know, protection of the...
And I understand, Mr. Uriarte, but you're actually articulating one of the committee's concerns is that these are topics that we've now had to raise in the context of these hearings on multiple occasions, which is why you're hearing an emphasis today on a request for dates certain and the articulation of a timeline by which we might actually have the responses so that we can obviate the need to have further hearings where we ask these same types of questions of you.
Well, I certainly understand that interest, and I think we share that interest, Congresswoman. As I think you can appreciate, the letter to the Marshal Service was a change and addressed new facts that had not been discussed previously, right? That was something that happened between the last hearing and this hearing, and so that changed the focus of what we were doing in terms of responding to the requests. But again, I think the important thing here is that we are continuing to work with staff. We had, I think a collaborative discussion, as you mentioned, on June 7th, and we hope to have a response for you in the near future.
Thank you, sir. My time has elapsed. I will now recognize Mr. Ivey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here today. I've got to express some frustration with the way the committee and the subcommittee are conducting themselves on this process. I think I said this at the last hearing. I know the Department of Justice was at that one, but it's a little disappointing to see. Like I was looking at this, for example, this is May 25. This is a letter from Jim Jordan to the Attorney General. This is demanding documents with respect to the Internal Revenue Service. There's a whistleblower issue apparently that he had questions about. One of the requests is all documents and communications between or among the Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service referring or relating to any investigations involving both the Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service from May 1, 2023 to the present. Now, I guess that's only a 2-day period, but of course, the Department of Justice has an entire division that does nothing but handle tax cases, civil and criminal. You know, the timeline for turning that around was June 8th. So whatever that is, 13 days or something, even if they had a longer period of time, the request for that volume of potential documents is ridiculous. Talk about unduly burdensome, and runs into implications for things like, for example, if you have ongoing criminal cases or investigations where production of those documents would be inappropriate because they could undermine the criminal investigation, could involve grand jury material, of course, which you can't turn over, as you just mentioned a moment ago, because of statutory restrictions in absence of a court order. I just think, you know, if we want to try and pursue information in some of these issues, and to be blunt, I think a lot of these underlying issues are a little on the silly side too. Certainly, I think we've got other things we could be doing beyond sort of the Loudoun County School Board issue, for example. And the Nina Jankowicz issue, which I think the department, or the Judiciary Committee already deposed her, but continues to pursue these documents. And just so for background, Nina Jankowicz was an employee who, when her position was announced, you had Mr. Jordan and other members of the House Republican caucus who raised issues about her that led to personal attacks on the internet, in which triggered personal threats to her. She had to hire a private security firm to protect her. They told her she needed to move from her house. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. The security officer told her she needed to go to her gynecologist, her prenatal meetings in disguise in case somebody was after her. I mean, you know, to me it feels like this is an inappropriate overreach of the authority to do oversight. And I'll note this too, I mean, I think the attempt to comply has been significant, despite the machine gun submissions of document requests and subpoenas. But I mean, it looks like here I'm reading the Department of Justice produced over 80,000 pages of documents, made 8 current employees available for 9 transcribed interviews, provided or agreed to provide testimony by senior department officials at multiple oversight hearings. And that doesn't include briefings and the like. With respect to Homeland Security, the secretary was up here before the secretary was here and testified before the Homeland Security Committee. So I think it's important for us to be reasonable about the requests we make, even though I think, frankly, a lot of these requests are unreasonable and out of line. I guess it's sort of consistent with some of the other things we've had happen this week. The censure of Mr. Schiff, I thought, was completely inappropriate. And today we had actual votes on impeaching President Biden, which I think is just thoroughly ridiculous. So, but this seems to be consistent with that. That appears to be where the Republican caucus is going. And I think that's disappointing because the people have more important business to get done, but that seems to be where we are. At this point, Mr. Chairman, I would move to adjourn the hearing.
The gentleman's time has expired. We're not to the point where we're adjourning the hearing.
So I think it's.
Can we have a vote on that?
motion.
That's non-debatable, it has to have a vote right away.
All right.
All those in favor?
All those in favor of, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We're going to request a roll call vote. Its clerk will call the roll.
We'll have to get the clerk up here, so. Committee will suspend while we get the clerk. Can you say that?
All right, the committee will suspend while we get the clerk.
Sleeping. He almost caught you sleeping. Glenn's quick.
It's at 3:25. Because it got, we have to come in before Secret Service, before the Senate comes in.
I think he should waive. He should waive the rule. Sorry, he's not asking for it, so he won't. Withdraw your motion.
In the spirit of cooperation, I will withdraw the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ivy. All right. The motion to adjourn having been withdrawn, I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes, and then we'll exchange chairs back to Mr. Klein. So let's get back to the questions. Ms. Buteau, am I saying your name correctly?
Yes, Congressman.
Good. I want to make sure to say that correctly for you. I want to talk to you a little bit about a May 5th, 2022 request for documents about the Disinformation Governance Board that was reiterated on November 18th, 2022 by then Ranking Member Jordan, and then again on January 17th, 2023 by Chair Jordan. I want to show you a couple of documents up here because we are talking about reasonableness, and I appreciate Mr. Ivy talking about that. He talked about that extensively about we want to be reasonable about what we're doing. So let's take a look at these documents here for a second. This is a redacted document. Can you tell me anything about page 1 on this document that's been produced in response to the request for information on the Disinformation Governance Board?
With respect to redactions, as I've mentioned, the Office of Legislative Affairs works with the Office of General Counsel and the components to determine what material will actually be redacted. Sitting here from this chair right now, I can't speak to the document that is up on the board at this time, but I'd be happy to work with your staff on any specific document production that you have concerns about.
Are you able to tell me anything about any one of these 4 pages? That's page 1, you see there, it's got the heading on it, or page 2, which is the completely blank document. And I want to show pages 3 and 4. If you know anything about these documents at all, are you able to tell me anything at all?
So again, I'd be happy to work with your staff. The redaction process does not occur, in a vacuum, and as part of the accommodations process, we'd be happy to engage. Sitting here right now, I can't look at a whiteboard and speak to what's underneath it.
I know, neither can we. We'd like to know some of the information behind there. So I'm curious, in preparation for your hearing today, did you meet with the Office of Legislative Affairs to talk about the reasoning behind any of the redactions that were made on this or any of the documents?
So anytime we go through a document production process, again, like that trifecta, the Office of Legislative Affairs, which I lead, the Office of General Counsel, and the specific opponents that are impacted work together to make those determinations, and we work collaboratively as a team to determine what to keep within.
I've redacted a whole lot of documents in my career. I don't know that I've ever actually redacted the entire document before. Is this a customary practice for the Department of Homeland Security?
I think that there is long-standing practice in terms of protecting both the attorney-client privilege, PPI, and other law enforcement sensitive information. The Department of Homeland Security is a very large department, and we are uniquely situated.
How long have you been with the Department of Homeland Security?
Since February 27th, 2023, so about 3.5 months.
Oh, you've only been with them 3.5 months?
Yes, sir.
All right. So in your experience in your career, have you dealt with document production before, not just with DHS, but other places?
I spent nearly a decade as a Senate staffer, so I've been on the receiving end. So I
Yeah.
can appreciate the
So
frustration.
when you were on the receiving end and you saw documents like this, did it frustrate you?
Yes, Congressman, it did.
Yeah, it frustrated you because you really wanted to get some information to understand and hold to account the department that you were talking to, or get some transparency out of the department. Is that right?
I consider the role that I'm in right now the opportunity of a lifetime, and I can appreciate the frustration. I'm committed to working with you and your staff to get you the information you need.
So when can you commit to get me the information on this committee or the staff information about what exactly is behind the veil here?
So with respect to redacted information, it is often a case-by-case basis. In putting a specific timeline, again, I'm happy to connect our staffs and work expeditiously. I can appreciate that you all have been pushing for this information. I am, happy to work for this department and this administration, and I'm looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, and same to you, because I know if you've been on this side of the dais before, it is frustrating when you ask for documents and you don't get anything. And quite frankly, I think the folks in the committee and the committee itself is being reasonable with respect to this and a lot of other documents, and trying to just understand what went on with respect to the issues surrounding the Disinformation Governance Board. So how about in the next 2 weeks? Do you think you could look at just this document? Let's just start with that and tell us what's behind the veil and get that information to us.
Thank you, Congressman. I want to be respectful and careful to exactly what that one page is, but I can commit that within the next 2 weeks that our staffs will get that conversation rolling, and we'll roll in the right direction, sir.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'm out of time. I'll yield back. We're going to start a second round, or Mr. Klein? All right, we got a second round up. So Mr. Swalwell, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, and unless we got another motion, Mr. Ivy, you got another motion? All right.
Ready? Am I good to go?
You're good.
Great. Mr. Uriarte, how many witnesses has Chairman Jordan demanded that the FBI send for a transcribed interview?
Congressman, thanks for the question. I don't have the exact number in front of me. I'm trying to read very small print here, but I think it is about 20.
And how many have appeared?
As I said, we made 8 current employees available for 9 transcribed interviews.
And broadly speaking, what type of prep is required before a witness can appear for a transcribed interview?
Well, as you know, I'm sure, many of the people who they're asking to appear are career special agents at the FBI who don't regularly deal with Congress as part of their day-to-day jobs. And so, they want to have a conversation with someone in my office, in the Office of Congressional Affairs at the FBI, to understand what this interaction looks like, to understand what types of questions they may get, to be able to ensure that the information they're providing to Congress is accurate. I think that is in not only the FBI and the department's interest, but also in Congress's interest to make sure that those engagements are as fruitful as possible. And that takes dozens of hours just to get one person available for a transcribed interview.
Well, Mr. Uriarte, please pass along to the Department of Justice my gratitude, and I actually think the gratitude of most of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, for what law enforcement does every day. The way I see it, you all are working very hard to take down the bad guys. You catch the terrorists, you catch the bank robbers, you catch the people that exploit children, you go after people that abuse COVID funds, and we're seeing billions of dollars of abuse there, and you're making sure that there's integrity, in public service. And so thank you for doing that. I don't want to defund you. The chairman of this committee wants to defund you, and he and others are raising money off the idea of defunding the police. I don't want to do that. I also just sit here stunned after this hearing. Again, so if they're the Cleveland Browns, they've lost another game en route to a 0-16 season by the end of next year. But I still don't understand now, and it was not explained to me by Chairman Jordan or anyone a part of this committee why they're not with Bill Barr anymore. Again, just to recap, Jim Jordan loves Bill Barr. Bill Barr is doing the Lord's work, Jim Jordan said. Thank God for Bill Barr. I mean, it's biblical when it comes to Jim Jordan and Bill Barr. Bill Barr is pursuing the truth, exactly what Americans want from their Attorney General. So what does Bill Barr think about the Mar-a-Lago raid, which Jim Jordan and others are upset about, and the reason they've dragged the Department of Justice here? Again, Bill Barr thinks the effort to present Trump as a victim in the Mar-a-Lago document affair is a cynical political propaganda exercise. He says Trump's toast. And Barr said just this month, the government acted responsibly, and it was Donald J. Trump who acted irresponsibly. So I don't know what happened. I can only assume that when it comes to Bill Barr, Jim Jordan is all in until Bill Barr departs with the one client that this committee fights for every day, and that's Donald Trump. And that's too bad. That's too bad because, as we have seen, Donald Trump has no regard for the law, and anyone who defends him is going to be a foot soldier and a footnote in history books that chronicle his corruption. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I'm going to recognize myself for a second round of questions, and then we'll go over to Mr. Ivey. Ms. Buteau, I want to come back to you real quick. I want to talk about some documents that were requested of information related to targeting parents at school board meetings. This week, the committee received about 496 pages of mostly redacted documents relating to that specific issue. Do you know what the privilege was that was being asserted for any of the redactions in those documents?
With respect to redactions, the purpose of redactions from the department are typically attorney-client privilege, deliberative materials. Without looking at a specific document, I can't speak to it. Additionally, I'm not certain in that space it would be appropriate for me to speak to that in this venue, but again, I'd be happy to work with you.
How would we be able to get somebody in front of us that would be able to talk about those issues specifically? Because what we really need out of a witness here is to be able to talk about the privileges asserted and what the basis is for them and why we're getting so many redacted documents. And though I sympathize with your position, having just been there 3 or 4 or 5 months, and maybe not having taken an integral part in the production of these documents, when we ask for a witness to come here, we need a witness that can actually give us those answers. Who would we talk to about that?
So I can appreciate that concern. I think the role that I play here in any of the Legislative Affairs offices is to be a conduit between Congress and the agency. Each one of these redactions, none of them exist in a vacuum, so we take them on a case-by-case basis. So with respects to the document you're referencing now, happy to see if, through the accommodations process, we can get you additional information, and I commit to working with you.
Yeah, and my line of questioning now really just relates to the 496 pages of mostly redacted documents that were just recently given to the committee this week, in fact, just this last week. Did you take part in gathering those documents together and producing those documents? Was that part of what you did?
With any document production, including redactions, it's a collaborative effort between the Office of Legislative Affairs.
I get that. I just want to know if you were involved in that.
With respect to this production, as you know, this request has been outstanding for some time and it's been a rolling. So some materials may have gone into process before I was even at the department. So yes, I participate. I can't say that page A started before I got there or after I got there, but yes, I was part of the production.
Okay. Who was the person, because I know when we produce documents on behalf of a client, somebody at the end of the day looked at the bevy of documents before they went out the door and said, okay, here's what we got, here's what we're given. Who was that person?
Congressman, I understand it's unsatisfying. It is a collaborative effort. We work together.
I get that. Collecting the documents, get them together but at some point, somebody's actually going to review the last set of documents to go out the door. And they're going to say, okay, I approve this going out the door. Who's that person?
I don't believe it comes down to a single person at the end of the day. That is not how it operates within the department.
somebody has to send those documents out the door, right?
Yes.
So who's the person that sent these 496 pages out the door? Was it a secretary? Was it an assistant? Was it somebody with authority to look at the stack of documents and say, yes, these are the ones we approve to send out?
Congressman, I want to verify, but I believe at the end of the day, the person who actually pushes the button is not necessarily someone who's part of the chain of determining what goes out of the door.
Well, that doesn't give me warm and fuzzies. You say the person that's going to push the button is not really the person involved in determining what goes out the door. Seems like that is the person determining what goes out the door. So who is that person?
With respect to correspondence, inquiries, productions, and I do believe, as you notated, I've been at the department for 3.5 months. We typically have a process where we receive incoming information. It is then designated to various components. If it goes to a component or if it's addressed to headquarters, it goes to headquarters. In an instance where there is a component element, that is where legislative affairs works with the component, works with general counsel, everyone works together, and there is an exec secretary that pushes information out. I do think there are some nuances with respect to document production, but I want to make sure I don't get too far
And I
off
feel
there.
bad for you because you're here and you're trying. You don't really have all the information to give us the answers we need. And I feel very bad for you because you're in that position. But that's why I'm asking you who needs to be in this spot, who needs to be in the hot seat, so we can just ask questions. I haven't been rude today to you, I don't think, and I haven't asked unreasonable questions, not to my knowledge. I'm really just trying to ask reasonable questions, and I need answers to those, and you can't give them to me, so I need to know who is that person.
Congressman, I appreciate the treatment here today, and I'm honored to be here. I'm also honored to be in this seat, and you will get the answers you're seeking.
Okay, I'll take you at your word.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Ivey, you're up next. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Just along the lines of the last couple versions of the conversation, and I know you were asked about identifying the redacted documents, and I guess trying to figure out what kind of timeline you could provide answers about them. I guess I would say, as having been at the other side of that, is it's hard for you to make that kind of assumption or guess even, because you might not know the reasons for why it was redacted. So even though you might be able to physically produce it in a matter of hours, if there's a legal requirement that required the redactions and say a court order is necessary to get beyond the redactions and produce the information, you can't do that without the court order, and you don't know what the timeline's going to be for that. With respect to the who can give the answers about timing and some of the specifics about the document requests, my suggestion is also a former staffer just like you. What we did during the Whitewater hearings was that we actually had meetings between the staff and members of those departments who were making those decisions. And what was good about that was, for example, if you have a redaction discussion that involves information that's confidential or otherwise not to be made public, trying to have that discussion in a public hearing doesn't work very well. So having them behind closed doors where you can have candid, why was this redacted? Well, it was redacted because of this. So my suggestion would be to have much more robust and extensive meetings at the staff level of the committee prior to us having a committee hearing, and include us as well on the minority side, so that some of these answers can be addressed, I think, in a more productive way than having hearings for these sorts of things, where by necessity they send one person up who doesn't have all the answers because there are multiple departments that are involved in making these decisions. And with respect to CISA, we got a lot of this on the Homeland Security Committee, and this goes to the conspiracy theories with respect to disinformation, namely that the Biden administration is attempting to mislead the public or abuse social media and the like. The only conversation I would say that the part of the conversation that's missing there is the fact that the United States has competitors like China, Russia, terrorists, Sinaloa cartel, and others that are actively engaged in disinformation in the United States. That includes in elections, we know the Russians were involved in submitting disinformation in 2020. In fact, Mr. Durham said that yesterday at the hearing when he came up here to testify. And so it's important, I think, for the United States to try and address that. Unfortunately, Chairman Jordan, Mr. Gates, and some others engaged, I think, in disinformation in some of the comments they made about the panel that was set up at the Department of Homeland Security. And that included the personal attacks on Ms. Jankowicz, which undermined our ability to respond to some of these sorts of disinformation pieces. And I would just say this, too. I know there's a sense that with respect to disinformation, the government can't and shouldn't be in the business of determining what's true or not. And I think we do have to be careful, especially when it comes to political positions. But there's also points where we clearly need the government to be involved, and it's really made a difference. Just a couple of quick ones. Information about tobacco when I was a kid. And I lived in North Carolina, so tobacco was everywhere. It wasn't known that tobacco was killing people. Public efforts and public campaigns to address that and provide information, accurate information to the public, made a difference there, even though the tobacco companies were saying at the time that the government was providing false information. Drunk driving was another one. Seatbelts was another one, too. One of the ones we've got right now, there's a sort of a growing movement with respect to active shooter issues. People are making false calls about whether there's an active shooter in a local school. I think it would be good for the government, whether it's a local or state government in that community, to put out the correct information. No, there's not an active shooter going on. That sort of information, emergency scenarios and the like, I think it's important for us to be able, the government, federal, state, and local, to be able to put out information that addresses these sorts of issues, because I think it benefits the public. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Uriarte, on May 24th, 2022, we sent a letter to FBI Director Wray for information about the nearly 3.4 million queries that the agency made to a database of information collected without warrants under Section 702, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. The committee renewed this request in the 118th Congress via letter dated January 17th, 2023. The FBI produced classified documents on March 14th, 2023, and scheduled a demonstration of its FISA 702 capabilities for committee staff. In April 2023, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released its annual statistical transparency report for calendar year 2022, which noted that the FBI conducted over 200,000 warrantless queries of U.S. person communications that year. Still, the committee's request from its May 24th, 2022 letter remains outstanding. When can the committee expect that these requests be fulfilled?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. I think, as you know, and as we've discussed previously, renewing FISA and Section 702 specifically is a high priority for the department. And, in this instance, as you identified, we have taken steps to try to be responsive to the committee's request. I was not tracking, frankly, that there were still outstanding aspects of that request, but I'm happy to take that back, and I'm confident that we can get that information to you. Again, we believe that Congress's authorities here are important, particularly the oversight matter. Our goal is to have a robust and candid conversation about reforms of FISA, including with this committee, to make sure that we can reauthorize this committee to protect the American people.
Well, it will definitely be candid, and how robust it will be and how frequent these will be always is determined by the responsiveness of you and the agency. Has the FBI made any efforts to calculate the number of unique query terms that refer to a U.S. person? And does the FBI have the capability to calculate that number?
Congressman, that's a very good question. I don't have the answer sitting here today, but I'm happy to take that back.
In addition to the requests in the May 24, 2022 letter, will the FBI provide a full accounting of the U.S. person queries conducted by the FBI in calendar year 2022?
Again, I'm happy to take that back, Congressman.
And can you commit to providing the committee with additional documents responsive to the committee's request by July 6?
I don't want to overstate my ability to commit by the date certain, but I am confident that we can work with you and staff to get you that information.
Okay. With that, I'm going to yield 5 minutes to
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
the gentleman from Maryland.
You know, the speaker said we should be on the floor by 3:25. And in the spirit of cooperation, I said we could move forward. I know some members have just arrived, and I normally wouldn't object to anybody having a chance to speak, but I would ask that we be given the chance to go to the floor.
My understanding is 4 o'clock is when the address begins.
The address begins at 4, but I thought, as I said, I thought the speaker told us to be there at 3:25, and
I appreciate you listening to the speaker on this occasion.
It's been tough to do this week, I must say. Yesterday in particular was extremely tough, but
We'll get you there. We'll get you there. Let me recognize the gentleman from New Jersey for 5 minutes, and we'll go from there. And I'll talk to the gentlelady from the gentlelady as well. I think she has some more questions as well, but okay, hang on. She only did 1 round, so since you got 2, let me go to the gentleman from New Jersey. He's recognized for 5 minutes. I only took half of my time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here we are, once again, finding ourselves in a time when justice, once a pillar supporting our democracy, seems to have become a simple commodity, available in different forms and delivered at varying speeds dependent upon who the target is. There is no clearer example of this than our federal government's treatment of Hunter Biden. Just this week, Americans watched in disappointed awe as the son of a president of the United States received a sweetheart deal on tax fraud and a felony gun possession. Can you fathom for a moment the consequences for one of my constituents if they committed even a fraction of what Hunter Biden has done? If any of you did it, you'd be in jail. A gun infraction of that magnitude, putting a false social security number in an application while you're high. And yet we have hundreds of, probably thousands, not hundreds, thousands of individual people who've committed accidental mistakes with a gun where they didn't have their permit with them, where they went into another state where they're not permitted. Just happened recently to a young black woman a little time back. She had no infractions against her, didn't do anything wrong, didn't even have a parking ticket. And she crossed over from Pennsylvania, where she had a license to carry, into New Jersey. And she was stopped by a state trooper. First thing she told him is, I have a gun, I have a license for it. She didn't realize she needed to have a separate license for the state of New Jersey. Never committed any crime whatsoever, not even a speeding ticket. Single black mom. You think she got the treatment Hunter did? She didn't. She got 3 years in jail. 3 years in jail. Justice for you, but not for me. Is that what's coming out now? This behavior is why so many in our country, myself included, continue to grow more and more frustrated and angrier with their federal government. So while the DOJ lets Hunter Biden walk free and continue to parade around the world doing God knows what, and some more information just came out today that's unbelievable from the IRS whistleblower. It's going to really rock everybody's world a little bit, and it involves the president. We're going to push for answers. We're going to push for answers because that's what the American people want. But what do you know? The same DOJ letting Hunter Biden off the hook also continues to slow walk any and all material requests on this topic despite months of requests. We get it. We know what you're doing. Mr. Uriarte, you're a nice guy. I really do. I think you are. You're a nice man. I like you. And I thank you for coming back today. But enough is enough. You must either be on the side of a system of justice that ensures fair and equal treatment for all, or are you on the side of a system that caters to the privileged and the powerful? a system that bends the rules for those with connections, while the average American is left bearing the brunt of its harshness. There is no middle ground here. There is no room for compromise. So, Mr. Uriarte, I will ask you very clearly again, given the gravity of this committee's concerns, why did we receive an insubstantial response from the United States Attorney David Weiss rather than a direct response from the Attorney General of the United States, to whom we addressed our May 25th letter regarding the removal of an IRS whistleblower, and some of that's more is coming out today, from the Hunter Biden investigation? If you could do it quickly, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you for the question. As the Attorney General has said, our goal is to treat like cases alike and to, in this circumstance, ensure that we can demonstrate some independence related to this matter. The Attorney General, the Attorney General has supported U.S. Attorney Weiss, who was appointed under the prior administration, continuing this investigation. And response to the letter that we received from the committee had specific questions about his investigation.
And we thank you, and we've heard that before, but can you guarantee that the committee will receive a detailed and substantive response to our May 25th letter, that was a long time ago, by July 6th from Attorney General Garland himself, and not from a delegate, not from one of his delegates? What does he think? What's he going to say?
Well, Congressman, part of my responsibility under the Justice Manual is to respond to letters from Congress. And so, that is obviously something we'll take into account as we determine how best to proceed from here.
I still have no answer.
Okay.
I thank you, and I yield back.
All right, the gentleman yields back. I will have a brief second round of questions. Myself, Ms. Butow. On April 28, 2022, the committee held a hearing entitled Oversight of the Department of Homeland Security, with DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testifying as the witness. Chairman Jordan, then in his capacity as ranking member, requested information as to whether 42 individuals on the terrorist screening database who were encountered at our southwest border were released into the United States. Despite Secretary Mayorkas saying, quote, "Congressman, I will deliver you a response," end quote, this committee still does not have this information. In the meantime, the department has encountered another 136 individuals on the terrorist screening database between our ports of entry at the southwest border. Chairman Jordan repeated this request for information in a May 2nd, 2022 letter to DHS, which was reiterated in the January 17th, 2023 letter containing an itemized list of all outstanding requests. When will the department provide the committee with the number of illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list who have been encountered at the southwest border and subsequently released into the United States, as well as the current status and disposition of each of these cases?
Congresswoman, I can appreciate your question and your patience. We are currently in the process of scheduling a classified briefing for both members and cleared staff. We at the department want to be responsive while also, respecting our obligations to privacy, national security, and other interests.
Do you have any sense of the timeline for setting said classified briefing?
Thank you. I can get right back to your staff today, actually, with more of a timeline. I know the conversations are ongoing.
And on November 22nd, 2022, then Ranking Member Jordan and Senator Grassley requested information from the department regarding the categorical parole program created for Venezuelan nationals. The department partially responded to this letter on April 28th, 2023, but failed to provide any responses to 23 of the 24 requests for information. Instead, the department's response contained a large amount of unrelated language related to the desire for unrelated legislation. The committee reiterated this request multiple times and updated the request to include the additional countries the administration has added to the illegal parole programs. In a meeting with DHS staff on May 16, 2023, the department stated that there was an attachment that was intended to accompany the letter that was not included. Can you tell us what steps have been taken to provide the information requested and on what timeline we might receive it?
Thank you. I understand that there was an attachment that was intended to be attached to a response to a letter that was not. The department takes its obligation to provide accurate and complete responses very seriously, and we will work to achieve that end. With respect to a timeline for additional information, this is an issue that we are working very, very hard on, and I would expect movement on this production within a very short timeline. Again, I don't want to overcommit a specific day, but I can tell you that we are tracking this very closely, and I would anticipate something very soon.
All right. I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing today at today's hearing and the committee members for their participation. This concludes today's hearing. Without objection, members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, this hearing is adjourned.